$4.17 per gallon, a brand new record. Today at gas pumps around America, the boards are flashing shocking numbers. A new national record was broken, and many experts are predicting that this is only the start. In today's video, we look into the troubling market conditions and most importantly, the rising cost of gasoline, exploring how much more pain you should expect to feel in the near future, finally concluding with some ways you may be able to protect yourself against surging expenses and falling stock prices. We begin with a bit of history. To understand gasoline, you have to understand oil. At its core, how the price of gasoline is derived is incredibly complex, but for the sake of this video, just know it essentially boils down to this: West Texas Intermediate, better known as crude oil. If WTI goes up, gasoline prices follow, and it's no coincidence that recently WTI and other oil blends around the world have been on the rise, behaving more like meme stocks and less like commodities. Turbocharging these prices is this guy. You see, following the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, countries around the world have begun to sanction Russian products, including oil. Simple economics tells us if you limit supply and demand stays the same, the price will naturally push higher, and with Russia producing as much as 10% of the world's oil, it's no surprise that we're seeing these massive price swings in the crude markets, which are ultimately trickling down to the price you pay at the pump. But while many are quick to blame the Russians, the truth is that oil inventories were trending down for years now. Countless articles and journalists have been reporting on the issue in the months leading up to this sad conflict. If you take a look at a chart of WTI, you can see it was on the rise for all of 2021. If we step back a moment and slide the conflict in Europe to the side, what you see is that the house of cards had already been built. The war was just the wind that happened to blow it down. Now here's the story they don't talk about in the news. Back in 2020, when oil went negative, there was a perfect storm. American production in the Permian Basin became unprofitable, and many drill sites were closed down because they simply couldn't make money with oil so low. At the same time, there was a massive push by many green groups to defund crude investments. Massive banks, pension funds, and financing institutions like BlackRock simply decided that having anything to do with oil was a sin, and they pulled their money from various energy businesses. America was once again depending on overseas production to fill the gap, and guess what? Following a reopening and record-breaking demand, the supply simply wasn't enough to keep our prices comfortable. The Ukrainian conflict turbocharged this issue, and now we have an oil shock. The bad news is that nearly every single time crude prices have jumped this much, what followed was a recession. Sadly, many believe that higher prices are exactly what we need. For the environmental crowd, there is plenty of evidence to suggest that moving people away from fossil fuels en masse can only be done via higher prices. There's enough oil in the United States to easily make gas reasonable, but as I just mentioned, various factions have made extracting it nearly impossible by defunding the oil industry in the West. And that's only part of the reason. On top of this, others like legendary investor Charlie Munger believe that oil should be treated as a national treasure, an asset to the country that should remain underground, letting others deplete while we save what he calls precious black gold. It's a rather bizarre opinion that you can hear him explain in his latest public interview. Take a listen to his wild analysis.
John Van Eekhout wrote in several questions, all in one email, that he's just asking about U.S. energy independence. And I'll give you some of the questions. I won't ask every one of them. But he says, Charlie, in the past, you've stated that the USA should keep all oil and gas production domestic and let the rest of the world deplete the supplies of other exporters. Do you still believe that position has merit? What's your opinion of President Biden's position on oil and gas energy production here in the USA, given that he's canceled the Keystone Pipeline and is curtailing drilling on Bureau of Land Management lands? Is this just a concession to the green progressives? Will we ever have a stable supply of renewable energy, given the issues of wind power we've seen in Europe? And do you believe there'll be enough renewable electrical generation capacity to offset the use of coal and petroleum to generate electricity?
Well, that's a lot to talk about. I am in favor of conserving the hydrocarbons instead of using them up as fast as possible. And I'm in favor of all this new generating capacity now that it's gotten so efficient from solar and wind. And if there were no global warming problem, I would be in favor of exactly what the government is now doing, which is encouraging a hell of a lot more solar and wind. I think it would be smart to do that just to conserve the petroleum. The petroleum has enormous chemical uses in fertilizers and chemistry and so on, and it's precious stuff. And I don't mind having a goodly part of it that remains in the ground. It's a good place to store it. I regard the petroleum reserves of the United States about the way I regard the black topsoil of Iowa. I regard it as a national treasure. And just as I'm not in favor of sending all the topsoil of Africa down and dumping it in the ocean, I'm not in favor of using up all the petroleum as fast as possible. So I love the idea of conserving the natural resources.
But while Munger may feel that we should stay away from drilling, there are plenty who believe that we are putting ourselves in a difficult position where other countries could use oil as a financial weapon to cripple our people and economy. We are already seeing that with Russia, and the consequences are yet to play out. What unfolds from here nobody can predict, but we do know one thing. In almost all major wars, holding cash has been the worst of ideas. Follow the trend and you'll see that during every major conflict, the United States has experienced high inflation, and the gas pump is only part of that. That means a complete loss of purchasing power by regular everyday people. But there is a way to hide, and surprisingly, it's in stocks and real estate. Take for an example World War II. While the market was turbulent following the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, it was crazy to see that once the US had won Midway, the market recognized this as the bottom, and what followed was a massive upward surge both militarily and financially. By 1946, shortly following the surrender, the stock market had nearly doubled from its 1942 low. The same story goes for real estate. A house in 1940 cost an average of $2,938. 10 years later, following the victory, a house in America had nearly tripled in price to $7,350. Interestingly enough, Warren Buffett was asked about this exact topic in 2014 when Russia had originally invaded a portion of eastern Ukraine, and fears of a global war were on the rise. Take a listen to his answer, one that resonates today.
When people start to think, well, this could be the beginning of something really bad, it could be even a World War III situation, it could be a return to the Cold War, does any of that ever go through your mind?
Well, if you tell me all of that's going to happen, I will still be buying the stock. You're going to invest your money in something over time. The one thing you could be quite sure of is if we went into some very major war, the value of money would go down. I mean, that's happened in virtually every war that I'm aware of. So the last thing you'd want to do is hold money during a war. And you might want to own a farm, you might want to own an apartment house, you might want to own securities. But I mean, during World War II, the stock market advanced, and the stock market's going to advance over time. American businesses are going to be worth more money. Now, dollars are going to be worth less, so that money won't buy you quite as much. But you're going to be a lot better off owning productive assets over the next 50 years than you will be owning pieces of paper, or I might throw in bitcoins.
So there you go. While the market panics over Russia and oil prices, understand that throughout American history, war, despite costing lives, limbs, and bloodshed, has been a positive for market returns so long as you win the war. That is simply the cruel reality. Meanwhile, during these turbulent times, inflation has surged, and keeping your money and assets outside of the currency has proved reliable. Before ending this video, I just want to give you guys a quick update. If you're a subscriber to the channel, you may know that back in late January, I created a video called The Super Bubble Nobody's Talking About. In it, I described the potential for a massive oil shock and concluded with some details regarding the substantial oil position I had bought into. Today, I just wanted to let you guys know that I have exited this position. Specifically, it was two different USO Leap call options. One was the January 23rd $85 call, the other was the January 23rd $45 call. The former gave me a 100% return, the latter over a 400% return. Overall, given some earlier selling and hedging, I exited the whole position, giving me a net return of around 120%. Obviously, with this dramatic move, predicting what will happen in the short term is nearly impossible, but with inventories continuing to push lower and sanctions expected to persist indefinitely, I have a sneaking suspicion that the commodity supercycle may be just starting. As always, thank you guys for watching. Please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed it.